Every now and then, history gives you a name people remember because of the office they held. But sometimes that story gets told too narrowly. Because Oscar Davis Sr. was never just a commissioner, and Geneva Davis was never just a wife standing beside him. Together, they built a family, businesses, influence, and eventually a political legacy that would stretch across generations. Oscar Davis Sr. was born in Putnam County, Georgia in 1923. He served in the United States Army during World War II at a time when the military itself was segregated. Afterward, he returned to Middle Georgia, attended Morehouse College, became involved in business and community affairs, and eventually became deeply connected to the civil rights movement in Baldwin County. And in 1948, Oscar married Geneva Bell. Together, they raised 4 children. And Geneva had her own life of service. She worked as a teacher in Baldwin County during the era when schools were still segregated, teaching in several rural black schools before integration. She spent years in education before eventually retiring. But retirement did not mean Geneva stopped working. She later became heavily involved in the family business, including People's Funeral Home. And after Oscar's death, she took on even more responsibility in keeping that operation moving. That matters because when we call Oscar and Geneva a power couple, we're not just talking politics. We're talking two people who built something together: a household, businesses, community influence, and a legacy. Oscar's influence in the civil rights movement is documented by one of the most recognizable organizers of that era, Reverend James Orange. Orange worked alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and later came to Milledgeville during the J.P. Stevenson labor campaign. Years later, when Orange talked about his earlier work in Milledgeville, he remembered Oscar Davis by name.
Milledgeville, Georgia, at the Holiday Inn. And I said, okay. A week and a half later, I was in Milledgeville, Georgia. And I was assigned to the J.P. Stevens organizing campaign for the first 2-3 years. When I went to Milledgeville, the civil rights movement had been in Milledgeville, and I had been to Milledgeville working with Oscar Davis and them. Oscar and them had been bonding us out of jail. And that was J.P. Stevens' plant in Milledgeville. That was one in Dublin, Georgia. That was one in Louisville, Georgia, one in Tipton, Georgia. And we was assigned to organizing those 4 Stevens plants. And in Milledgeville, Georgia, they wanted me to organize the community and supporting the workers, and I did. And while we was in Milledgeville, the Concord Fabrics and the J.P. Stevens put some money up with the police department and bugged our hotel rooms.
That tells you something. Before anybody called him Commissioner Davis, Oscar Davis was already involved, already connected, already helping civil rights worker, already part of the local structure that helped keep the movement going. And Oscar wasn't alone. Men like Reverend Curtis H. Boddy, the local NAACP, SELC members, and other black civic leaders were also pushing Baldwin County toward political change. The issue eventually became very simple. Black people could register, black people could vote, black candidates could run. But under Baldwin County's at-large election system, black voters were still having difficulty electing candidates of their choice to the county commission. Oscar later said they had tried repeatedly. People turned out, candidates ran, and still they couldn't break through. Eventually, Oscar said they came to one conclusion: the only thing left was to sue. And in 1982, Baldwin County residents, the local NAACP, and the ACLU challenged the county's election structure in federal court in a case known as Boddy versus Hall. And the lawsuit would end up exposing more than just a problem in the county commission, because when Baldwin County's voting structure came under federal scrutiny, the Board of Education came under a microscope too. The Board of Education had once been selected through a grand jury appointment system, and in 1970, that structure was changed. Then in 1972, the board moved to a countywide at-large elections. But those changes were supposed to be submitted for federal preclearance under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. They were not. For years, it took the lawsuit to force the issue into federal review. So Oscar Davis and the people fighting alongside him were not challenging who sat on the county commission. Their fight helped expose questions about how power was being selected in both county government and the school system. And once federal authorities looked at it, the Justice Department objected it. It found racial bloc voting in Baldwin County and raised concerns about at-large elections, numbered posts, and majority vote requirements, weakening black voting strengths. That fight eventually led to a new commission structure. Districts were created, and in 1984, Oscar Davis ran in District 1 and won. And he became Baldwin County's first black county commissioner. But Oscar was not the only black businessman walking into history that year. Clarence Smokey Simmons was fighting in District 2, and his first runoff against incumbent Grady Torrance showed Torrance winning 449 to 412. Smokey challenged the results, and a court found enough improper ballots to cast doubt on the outcome. So much so that 40 ineligible voters casted votes in the district. So a new runoff was ordered, and Smokey won. So when Baldwin County's new commission took shape, Oscar Davis and Smokey Simmons were a part of a political breakthrough that had taken lawsuits, organizings, and years of pressure to make that possible. And because Clarence Smokey Simmons was involved in a runoff, Oscar Davis was coined the first black Baldwin County commissioner. And Oscar stayed. He served for roughly 15 years. He became more than the first. He became part of the institution itself. And through all those years, Geneva was there, teaching, raising their children, working alongside Oscar, helping operate the family business, and later helping carry the funeral home forward. Then in January 2000, Oscar Davis Sr. died while still serving as commissioner. He and Geneva had been married for more than 50 years. And this is where Geneva's own political story begins. After Oscar's death, Geneva took over District 1 seat, and in doing so, she became Baldwin County's first female county commissioner. Not first black woman, first woman, period. She went on to win full terms in 2000 and 2004 and represented District 1 until 2008. So think about the arc of that marriage. Oscar helped challenge a political system that had failed to produce black representation. He becomes the first black man elected to the commission. Then the woman who had been beside him through more than a half a century of marriage later walks into the same government and becomes the first woman ever to sit on that commission. That's why power couple is more than a title. Oscar broke one barrier, Geneva broke another, and the family legacy continued. When Geneva left office in 2008, their daughter, Emily Davis, was elected to District 1. Oscar, Geneva, Emily. Since the district system was created out of that Voting Rights Act, the Davis family has essentially remained connected to that same seat. And years after Oscar's death, people began pushing for Baldwin County to permanently recognize what he meant to this community. There have been public discussions and requests to name the county government facility in honor of Oscar Davis Sr. No final decision has been made. Maybe one day it happens. Maybe Baldwin County eventually chooses Oscar, maybe Smokey Simmons, maybe Geneva Davis. Any of those names would represent somebody who helped change what leadership looked like in Baldwin County. Geneva Bell Davis will eventually die years after Oscar, leaving behind her own legacy as a teacher, businesswoman, mother, and Baldwin County's first female commissioner. And that's how I think this story should be remembered. Not simply as a story of a man who became the first black commissioner, not simply as a story of a woman who later took his seat, but as the story of two people who spent more than a half a century building together: family, business, community, civil rights, politics, and legacy. Oscar and Geneva Davis, a Baldwin County power couple. This is Lamar King Sr., investigative analyst, new media, where the truth will never be silenced. Be great today. Peace.